Okay, I have 4:45. This is the Can We Get Along? Cultural Appropriation versus Cultural Exchange panel. If you do not need to be here, this is a great time to go. If this is where you want to be, we are going to be touching on a subject which I understand is a pretty touchy subject, but we're going to do our best to handle it respectfully and also critically. And since it is about culture, when we do our introductions, I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves and also to mention their cultural background. I'll start with myself. I'm Eneasz Brodski. I've written a few short stories, but nothing big, starting my first novel right now. I was born in Poland and raised in a Polish household, so I have a lot of Polish in my cultural background, but my parents escaped here when the Iron Curtain was coming down. So I spent most of my life being raised in the suburbs, so it's kind of a weird mix of conservative Polish with American suburbia. That's how I was raised.
Hey everybody, thanks for being here with us. I'm Amalie Howard. I'm a young adult author. My diversity book, as I like to call it, is Alpha Goddess, which is about East Indian mythology. It was an Indian X-Tech class in 2014, which is why the bookstores in the United States look for it to be on the list. So I was pretty psyched with that honor. As far as background, I am Middle Eastern, Indian, French, and Chinese. And I grew up in the Caribbean, Trinidad and Tobago. So, yeah. Mashup.
Nice. Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Stant Litore. Cultural background. Well, I grew up, Pacific Northwest American country, like out in the woods with a dairy goat farm. I grew up milking goats and stacking bales of hay. Didn't have much TV. Parents were kind of loosely Free Methodist sometimes and sometimes not, so there's a little bit of background there. Was raised in a trailer, later on a mobile home, which was awesome, because I was like a palace and a truck bride. I was like, whoa, that's awesome. And we had this old 1950s refrigerator. Do you know the ones with the rings on top? I don't even know how those work, but this one didn't. It was a dead refrigerator. But my mom had all the books that she brought from her dad's house when she got married. And the books were all stuffed in there. There were like the Angelique novels, and there were the Lord of the Rings, and there were a whole bunch of Greek histories, like Thucydides and Herodotus. So I grew up like reading that refrigerator bookcase. I'm a local author. I write a few things: a zombie Bible, which is like Old Testament stories retold as episodes in humanity's moral struggle against the hungry dead. And I write Ensemble, which is about 25th century Islamic explorers who transfer their minds telepathically across time and space to make first contact with other species around the universe, and they get marooned in alien bodies on alien worlds. So that's me.
My name is Chaz Kemp. I'm an illustrator, mostly steampunk, fantasy, sci-fi. Can everyone hear me? All right? Okay. Me and my fiancée, Carolyn Kay, are currently working on the world of Ashalon. It is a fantasy / steampunk world. I'm currently working on a tarot deck that you can find on Patreon. And my cultural background is Black. I was born in Chicago, and we had some Native American kind of in our background, a little bit from my grandfather, and we're kind of a mix of Black, Scandinavian, Irish, that kind of thing. So there was a lot of cultural diversity in our heritage, and then when we moved to the Pacific Northwest, specifically Seattle. Our whole neighborhood was, Pacific Islanders, you had white, you had Black, you had everything. So racism was not something that was done or tolerated in my neighborhood. So, good stuff.
Yeah, hi, my name is Amalie Howard. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. This is always a big treat. How many people, this is the first time at Denver Comic Con?
Awesome.
Okay, how many people are repeat offenders? Okay, great. I'm primarily known for writing the Felix Gomez Detective Vampire series, and my newest book is Rescue from Planet Pleasure. I've also got a couple of stories in Cyber Worlds coming out in November from Hex Publishing, and they got a booth at AB095, and I have some stickers. Everybody loves stickers, so I got some for you. So get some afterwards and get this great cover art, postcard. I guess my family is all from Mexico. However, my sister had that Ancestry.com, that swab that you do.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like 30% was Oaxacan Indian from Mexico, and then like another 30% was from the Mediterranean area. So we didn't have any European Spanish blood. We had Spanish blood from the Mediterranean, which is North Africa, and about 15% English, and about 7% Irish, and 2% Finn. So I don't know where that came from. That's some Randy Finn in the background.
Alrighty. Well, I'm going to start this off, as one often does, with a definition. Wikipedia, which is where I go for most of my things I don't already know, calls cultural appropriation the adoption or use of elements of one culture by members of a different culture. And I don't like this definition at all, because I've always heard cultural appropriation is a bad thing. And I don't see what is bad with mixing cultures like that. I like it when cultures come together and build on each other. I think that's kind of what America is all about. That we do integrate other people, we make a united nation from that, and we've got some wonderful things like that. I love anime, personally. I grew up as an anime kid. I love what it's done to American animation. But we've been doing that forever. Rock and roll was taken from the blues, and that's expanded into a whole number of genres on its own. So I want to know, is this definition wrong? Is there a better definition that actually describes what cultural appropriation is better and why we should avoid it? Or am I wrong, and is any sort of cultural mixing a bad thing? And I wanted this time to start at the end with Mario and come back this way.
Well, I think that definition was correct in the way they've written it, but what has happened is that cultural appropriation, the term itself has gotten this term where you take elements from another culture, and you present that in a very exploitive way, and do it without really looking at how somebody from that culture might interpret that, usually in a way that they feel is not done with respect or a real understanding of their own culture.
I would agree with that. I don't know if there's really a whole lot I could add to that. I think cultural appropriation, what could be termed cultural appropriation in the negative sense, would be if you were to take elements from, let's look at the Native Americans, for example, calling a team the Redskins, regardless of how they might feel about it, and you make money off of that name without giving them any of that money, and that sort of thing, and you're basically exploiting their culture without giving anything back to that culture and without any regard to how they feel about it. So I think a lot of it has to do with respect. Something like, Americans that love anime and they want to do cosplay as anime characters and they want to learn Japanese, or even more simpler than that. You go out and you want to take martial arts classes. Well, martial arts, by its very definition, most of the time is Chinese, Korean, Japanese, etc. But you have a deep respect for their culture and you want to learn their art for a wide variety of reasons, and you want to really get into that because that really appeals to you. I would not consider any of that kind of thing cultural appropriation at all, because it's done with respect. So.
Yeah, I think that issue of respect is key. When I think about this, it has to do with who's listening, who has the power to say what their identity is. I think part of the title of this panel is something about cultural exchange versus cultural appropriation. Well, an exchange implies some level of partnership or potential partnership. That, like in commerce, you have two people exchanging something and both of them are benefiting. There's maybe not equal power, but at least some parity there. Where when I think of appropriation, I think of someone in one culture taking something from another culture that they don't have any say or any power over. Or I think about one culture defining what another culture's identity is going to be. And that culture doesn't get any say in how the broad public sees their identity. That's often the case with cases like they're naming a team the Redskins. In America, the Sioux have very little power at the moment to say this is who we are, this is what our identity is. The Facebook is flooded with memes or quotes supposedly by Lakota Sioux chieftains. And of course, almost none of them are. There's stories about Lakota Sioux characters that are written by white people, and the issue is that there's such a crowd of this that actual Lakota Sioux people feel drowned out, or they tell me they feel drowned out by the sheer mass of, sometimes without any malicious intent, it's just a sheer mass of fake things that aren't actually from their culture, masquerading as things from their culture, that they can't get heard. When they say, this is who we are, these are our stories, this is what our story is, they don't get to say that because they're being drowned out. So that's cultural appropriation. One, there's such a power balance implied in it when I think about it.
So you guys are probably going to hear a lot about respect today, because that's another thing that I was going to mention, that whole respect, respecting another culture. To appropriate means to take from one place and put in another. And in terms of cultural appropriation, sometimes it's misused because authors, I'm going to talk about it from a fiction perspective, will write something and, it could be, basically drowned in a stereotype and, or it's tokenism, or it's, it's not done with, again, respect and sensitivity. So as far as like an author, if I'm writing even in my own culture, I want to make sure there's appreciation, cultural appreciation instead of appropriation. And you brought up Native American, both brought up Native American culture, and Cynthia Leitish Smith, who's an amazing writer, said that, you have to reduce misrepresentation, and it's, in Native American stories, they're not so malleable that they're myths. They're traditional stories. They're not myths and fables. And it's interesting to think about it from that perspective. I mean, this is a human being's culture. And when we take it and use it in, our books or movies and not pay it the homage, or however you want to pronounce that, it deserves, then that sort of, it's what is the word I want?
Desensitizes.
I'm really passionate about this subject, so all the words are like clouding my head. It desensitizes the topic and the importance of it to people whose culture it belongs to.
Thank you.
Sorry.
No. Speaking of the indigenous thing, the Native Americans, indigenous people, I'm reminded of, was it earlier this year or late last year, that J.K. Rowling put out, it was this year? Yeah, her History of Magic in North America. And first of all, I love J.K. Rowling, both her writing and as a person. She's just the sweetest, nicest person. She does what she can to help people. But then she wrote this, and it drew a lot of backlash from Native American leaders and activists. And when I read it, I totally understood why, because she said things like Native American wizard community was particularly gifted in animal and plant magic. And it was just a few paragraphs, but it was basically the same stereotypes you see in all those old Western movies that were somewhat less than culturally respectful. And she got a lot of stereotypes in there, and she got quite a bit of backlash from that. And I was wondering, what can we do if we're writing about other cultures? How do we depict and share in other cultures without appropriating? How do we avoid her mistakes? And let's start this time with...
So perpetuating stereotypes is very harmful, right? And as writers, I think it's our responsibility for writing about a culture that doesn't belong to us, to do the research, to not be lazy. Don't be lazy writers. Don't, diversity isn't a trend. Isn't something you can just jump on. And people who you're writing for, I read this critique where this person said that this black character seemed like it was a white character painted brown. You don't want to do that. If you are writing a black character and it's meaningful to your story, then you need to do the research. And also sensitivity reads, beta reads with people, if you have friends or people of color, or if you're writing about Native American culture, different cultures, find them, ask them to read what you're writing. There's lots of other things. I talked about my background before. I grew up in a Hindu household. My father's a Hindu priest. And I still had people who wrote me letters saying you got it wrong. So my response to that, I'm humble. I want to know, okay, tell me what I got wrong. Let's have a discussion. As authors, we're told not to engage, so it's kind of like a hard balance to maintain, but have that dialogue. If you have represented the culture correctly, then anything that you get from somebody who says you didn't do it correctly should be positive. It should never be negative. But if it's negative, then you've done something, you didn't do your work. With sensitivity and respect. Those are my 2 pillars.
I like those 2 pillars.
Thank you.
For a writer, and as an author, I'll speak from an author's perspective on this too. I think for a writer, this starts with something that goes, it starts with something that has to inform all of your writing, even not just culture, but the way you look at gender, age, religion, anything. Every time you're writing another person's perspective, even a fictional person, you're writing through someone else's eyes. So it starts with listening to people that are different than you. If I'm going to write a novel where most of the characters are refugees, I should be listening to the stories of Syrian refugees right now. I should be listening to the stories of a young man who's a good friend of my family who fled Rwanda as a young child and spent 10 years in camps on the western border of Ethiopia. I should be listening to his stories. But you shouldn't just listen to the stories of one person. You should be listening to those stories. The reason I say that this starts for a writer, even before the issue of culture or ethnicity comes in, is that being a writer for me is about being alert, so alert to the fact all the time that the world looks different through everyone else's eyes. If you're a tall person, the world looks really different through the eyes of shorter people. If you walk into a room and you automatically are assured that you're one of the tallest people, you're going to be one of the tallest, maybe from upper body, physically strongest people in the room, you act in that social space very differently from somebody that's a foot shorter than you. Children see the world so differently from grown-ups. The colors are brighter. You notice little details on this flower here and this thing here that grown-ups never even register because your eyes are down there. And because everything has this newness to you, and you haven't always prioritized these details are important and these aren't. So everyone's eyes look different. So when it comes to writing through the eyes of another culture, it's about listening to the stories and the perspectives of that culture, and listening to the people. Actual people, rather than just, I think research is so critical, but hopefully you have people to talk to and listen to, and not only the books that we have too.
Basically, I project, so I would blow out the speakers. I'm going to come at this a little bit differently. I agree with what they're saying, but I've also talked with writers who are too scared to write about other cultures, because there's so much surrounding the idea of cultural appropriation that there are a lot of people who are so scared of offending anybody that they don't want to do anything other than just write the same stuff that we've been seeing for the last 75 years because it's safe, you know. I did a picture for a convention earlier this year, and it was basically a convention run by Native American people. And I did lots and lots and lots of research, and I talked to lots of Native American people, got their advice on the piece, and got some different advice from different people, but for the most part they said, well, don't draw her with a chieftain's headdress because that's sacred to us, and we see that all the time, and it really pisses us off. So I was like, okay, great. You know, don't draw a Cherokee in front of a teepee or in front of a totem pole because 2 different tribes. Okay, great. So, you know, that kind of thing. So I got all that information, and for a while I'd gotten so much information that I started to almost psych myself out before I even drew anything, because I got really afraid. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to go for it, because no matter what I do, no matter how good I am at it, no matter how great the piece comes out, there is always going to be somebody somewhere that's going to be offended. So should that stop me from doing it? No, because I want multicultural pieces in my portfolio. I want, when we do steampunk stuff, I want every culture represented. I want to see Mexican steampunk. I want to see, French steampunk. I want to see, Maori steampunk. I want to see all of it because it's so underrepresented. So I would say yes. Do the research. Talk to everybody you can from the various cultures, but don't let that stop you from pursuing the story or the art or whatever it is you want to do that is inclusive of all of these other cultures, because there's such a dearth of diversity that we need it, and we can't live in fear of pissing off one person or another, because you're gonna. Somebody's always going to be offended. There was a person that was offended that the piece was drawn by someone that wasn't Native American. Nothing I can do. I'm not Native American. But I did it anyway, and the majority of the Native Americans that saw the piece and that I talked to were like, dude, that's right on, that's awesome, that's respectful, that's really cool, we love it. And so it's like, hey, great, so that's what I live for. So, let that be a lesson to you.
If you read my books, you'll understand what I'm getting at, which is it's really important that you understand other cultures, that way you can really make fun of them better. So you go. It's my idea.
Okay. Well, going off
Dennis
that.
Memorial.
Yeah. This is, since most of us are writers, I was speaking with someone who said that publishers can only produce so many books per year, and of those, only a certain percentage will be with minority protagonists. And therefore, if a white person writes a minority protagonist and gets published, that is one less slot where a minority writer could have written a minority protagonist and gotten published. And the minority writer probably has better first-hand experience. But on the other hand, that sounds, well, not just sounds like, I have literally been told that white people should only write white people, and men should only write men, and so forth. And that, to me, that seems a little crazy, because I do not want to spend the rest of my life writing only straight white men. I would be bored to tears. But in addition to the boringness, I think it's kind of ghettoizing. I think this segregation makes things worse. And I don't think the world would be better if Anne Rice was not allowed to write male vampires, or if Elvis was not allowed to adopt the musical stylings of rock and roll.
Well, I'm not a vampire. I write about vampires.
Okay,
and
all right.
They never complain to me. So.
Can you go too far with this thing? And let's start this time with Mario and come back.
Well, I think it is important to understand other cultures simply because you got to get past the stereotypes, and you'll make whatever story you're writing a lot richer. That's right now I'm really into studying the West, the American West, and it really bugs me that a lot of the Western movies are just so shallow, and the way they present what was really going on is not done. It was not done well, and they lost that opportunity because a lot of the people who were alive back then were alive when they were making those movies and could have presented that, and that the situation was a lot more complicated and more complex and would have been more interesting, and instead it just sort of just streamlined into these rather, shallow movies about that. One of the best books I've read that I recommend to everybody is A White Tiger by Everand Adiga. And he's this man living in India, and it's very interesting reading about Indian culture from some guy there, and he's extremely sarcastic, which is what I like about it. And now that really made me understand the culture a lot better about what's going on, because we tend to see India as very monolithic, and he presents it as very different. And so I like that part. I like a lot of the books by Sherman Alexie, who talks about a lot of Native Americans. And he kind of plays that one thing versus the other. So I think sometimes if we keep saying the word respect, I'm trying to think, well, what exactly does that mean? And to me, obviously if you're making fun of somebody, that's maybe construed as not being very respectful, but I have to be honest with the way I write. And what I do is I like to point out the irony of what's going on. And Sherman Alexie had this great short story where he was, this writer had kind of really lost faith in himself and what he's doing. He's a Native American writer, and he's one of these guys writing kind of niche stories, but in his day he was like this boy in Seattle, and he would go to different coffee houses and readings, and he was like the Native American poet and stuff like this, and that niche thing. And then he just happened to wander into a bar that had people from his reservation there. And he got drunk, and he sold tons of books, and he goes, "It's great." And then he wakes up the next day, and he's in the alley behind the bar, and all the books that he had sold to people from his own tribe are just lying out there, and they just threw them away right away because that was not his thing. And it broke the guy's heart, and he never wrote again. So that's just a very different way of him looking at his own culture on that. So it's a very complex thing. It's negative and positive for everybody, and I think you shouldn't stray away from that and being honest in your portrayal of what's really going on.
Okay, well, that's kind of a sad story.
It was a sad story. Yeah. Very poignant, but it was very. I can't remember the name of it, but it was my favorite in the collection.
I would say one of the things that kind of drove me to continue to draw that picture that I mentioned earlier was the fact that I would rather put something out there from some other culture and fall on my face doing it, even if I try to follow the right channels and do the right thing and do it all with respect. If everyone from that culture gets pissed off at it, I would at least rather try for diversity than be too scared to do it. So for those that say, well, you should only write about your own culture and do your own thing and only see things from this particular viewpoint, whatever, and blah, blah, blah. I excuse my French, but that's bullshit. I would say, if the stories are good, if the art is good, if whatever it is you're doing is really, really good, it's going to get published. It's going to get noticed. Maybe not by that one particular publishing house, but it's going to get out there and people are going to see it. There's enough room for all the great stories in the world. So whoever said that to you, I think they were full of crap. So that's my take on it. But I love steampunk, so I'm ready to rebel against pretty much any kind of authority figure. So just point it to me, man. I'll talk to you.
As a part French person, I take offense to your saying bullshit is a French word.
Okay.
Saying.
Yeah, very well. You teach me another word and I'll use it.
Merde.
Merde? Very well. Cow merde.
As a farmer who had a bull, it's really weird to me that that's a swear word at all because we stepped it every day. Why is this sorry. Yeah, I don't feel like I have any authoritative answer for you, Eneasz. I feel like in some ways I'm the least qualified person since, my culture dominates 99% of the stories published in this
But I think
country.
you're undermining yourself, though, Stan, because you write really fantastic fiction about other cultures, and you should talk about that.
Well, I will offer something. It just won't be authoritative. Thank you, Amalie. That's very kind. I love what you said, Chaz. I think I too. I would rather try to do something beautiful and good and fail miserably than not try at all. And the reality is whatever the dominant culture is in a particular publishing industry, it's going to keep pumping out stuff from within that culture. So if you are within that culture, I think it's not like I'm going to go home and say, well, I really wish that more Chinese American authors got published, so I'm going to voluntarily not write anything. I'm burning up with stories. I'm hearing stories from people all the time that I want to share. I'm not going to be silent and not try to share beautiful stories. And even if I was, probably the outcome of that would not be that my space got filled by some brilliant Chinese American artist. My space would get filled by another cookie cutter white person. So it's not like that would do any good. I think you've got to do everything you can to fight to tell the most beautiful, good, diverse stories that you can. And it is a fight. This is starting to change, kind of, with some publishers, but it is so hard to get a sci-fi and fantasy novel on the bookcases that doesn't have a white person on the cover. Finally, that's starting to change a little bit. I remember, so my funny story, and I loved this publisher I was working with. I got way more, this is really loud, I got way more input into the covers than you do with any New York publisher. And, but the covers were still a battle, even though I had some input, I didn't have a final say. I had a story that was a feminist retelling of the story of Jephthah's daughter. So a young woman in the Near East, 13 years old, running through the hills, pursued by the hungry dead of her people, pursued by these zombie traditions of her past that are trying to eat her. And so I told my publisher all about the story, described the character, said, I want, if you're going to give me a representative cover, a cover with a person on it, I want it to look like her. I want it to be Near Eastern. So weeks later, I get the cover back. First cover is the only one I'll tell you about because I don't want to steal time from my colleagues. But the first cover they sent to me is a strapping young Irish lad with a billowing cloak and a javelin, and he's standing on this grassy knoll under a full moon framed in Celtic ash branches. And it's like they sent to, of course what happened was the publisher sent to the designer a note, coming of age fantasy story. And they sent back the cover with young Irish person under a Celtic full moon. Because that's how the publishing industry works. Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea books, almost all the characters are people of color. Because the only white people in that world are distant Arctic barbarians that occasionally invade. Every single cover published in the United States over the course of now 50 years has had white people on the cover. That's how publishing works. So you just have to, from wherever you're at, you've got to fight to tell the most beautiful, good, diverse stories you can. Because it's going to be a fight for anyone to get those stories out there.
As writers, part of our job is to reflect the world in which we live. We live in a very diverse world with lots of different types of diversity, not just related to race, but also to gender, able-bodied, sexuality, mental, and physical disability, which I just repeated myself. Anyway, and race is one of the meaningful parts of that. I read somewhere that something like 93% of publishers publish white male writers in Kidlit. So that's the default. And your statement is, if I were to flip that around, then by default, I would not be able to write about white anybody, because I'm not white. I might get dropped or two. But, I think that that's kind of unhealthy, because I agree with these gentlemen that if you're not helping to promote it, then you are also helping to suffocate it. And we don't want to suffocate it. We want to bring it to the fore and make sure that, the books that teens, well, in my case, I write teen fiction, teens are seeing themselves well represented in books. I mean, I didn't really see myself represented in books as a kid. I'm seeing it more and more, and I love it. I love seeing that diversity, especially when it's well handled and well done. For me, it's like, this whole push to support the person of color. So that slot thing you were talking about, publisher buying a book from a person of color, it came from Own Voices, and that was on Twitter. It's this hashtag Own Voices, where the boys give that spot to somebody who's going to talk about it, and giving those people a chance to tell their own stories and not have someone else tell it for them. But I don't think Own Voices should take away from other people who are the default, white, cis, male, able-bodied, trying to tell those stories as well. But again, back to what I said in the beginning, do it with respect and sensitivity. And if you piss someone off, because you are going to offend someone, that's just the nature of it. You could write something and be the complete expert and you will offend someone. Just be humble about it. Say, what can I learn from this? What can I take into my next book, into my next, idea?
Right, I think that whole premise, too, is predicated on the thought that each culture has a finite number of stories to tell. It's like, well, if you want to write about black people in America, well, there's only 47 stories you could tell, and that's all. So, and Alex Haley wrote 3 of them, so there's 44 left. So I like I said, I think that's kind of weird. There's a multitude of stories.
And then a POC also, a POC from the inner city Bronx versus a POC from here. Their experiences are going to be vastly different. But the only way you can know if you're doing it well is by talking to one of them. The other thing that I was going to bring up with respect to that is film, right? Take Tilda Swinton, who got cast as a Tibetan monk in Doctor Strange. She's a white woman. It's there's tons of Asian actors who are awesome, and that's kind of where this is stemming from a little bit. This whole Own Voices type deal. But I don't think it takes away from what you said or what you were told. I think that's stupid. Not what you were denying.
No.
I love Eneasz, sorry.
Yeah, Eneasz.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Whoever told you that is dumb, and I will take them out.
Okay, I'll introduce you.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So, you could probably take him. You got more fire in the belly. So, assuming that you did everything right, you're gonna still get attacked, has been my experience. I have a friend, an acquaintance, I guess, who...
Well, this person you know.
Yeah, really researched the culture, really likes the culture, and then wrote a novel which, it's a fantasy alternate universe anyway, so it's not even directly that culture. It's more like inspired by this culture, and yet still got excoriated by a few voices online, and did not at all deserve it. And it seems that no matter what you write, someone is going to be outraged. And it seems like there's some small faction of people out there that get personal satisfaction and maybe some measure of social power by being outraged at things and attacking people. I'm wondering, if you've done everything you can and you still get attacked, what do you do? How do you respond to that? What's the next step?
Well, I have a group of friends. What we do is every once in a while we get 1-star reviews from Amazon and we share them with one another and we start to psychoanalyze these people. Because we're like, don't you have anything better to do with your lives than to wrap your ego up in this story? If you don't like the story, you don't like the story. So, and there's the trolls basically. It's that thing. And that's the other side. To me, that's something very ironic about social media, because when social media was first presented, it was this great cultural web, and it's going to allow people to communicate on a very high level, intellectual plane, and it's kind of the opposite, especially now with the politics, is that you just can't even go there sometimes. You just like, even though I like this person, I'm not going to delete this post from them, because it can be very toxic, and that part. But yeah, there's a lot of people that have issues, and you're never going to solve them. But I like one of my favorite quotes is from Mae West, who said that people who are easily offended should be offended more often.
Yeah, I usually say screw those monkeys, but that's my way of dealing with trolls and stuff like that. Just because you try to create something beautiful, and you try to have a certain amount of purity and integrity in what you do.
I have no
well,
the dirtier the better.
When I say you, I was excluding you.
I know.
But no, we would never exclude you to your face. So the thing is that you try really hard to have as much integrity as you can, to be as pure as you can in what you're trying to do. If you're not out to offend anybody, and you do all your research and all your things that you're trying to do, basically, you're trying to get the diversity out there. And if there are people who don't like it and are going to be mad at you for doing it and whatever, then there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, there's literally nothing you can do about it. So you keep doing what you do, because hopefully there will be way more people that appreciate what you're doing. Or at the very least, you will feel really great about trying to bring more diversity to whatever your passion is. And that's got to be enough.
My goal as a writer is not to not outrage people. Like, not outraging people, that's not my goal. My goal is to tell beautiful, true, powerful stories that move me, and if I do it well, move readers. So if somebody writes to me and says, wow, that book really moved me, then that's a success. And I want it to be true. It's an integrity thing you're talking about. I would want that too. I would say, I want this story to be a story that reflects as much of the world as I can. I don't want it to be stacked full of stereotypes. I want it to be true, but my goal isn't to not outrage people. That's an awful goal for a writer. In fact, with most of the things I write, if somebody somewhere isn't outraged, then I have completely failed. I put zombies in the Bible. Someone's going to be out. Some people are outraged. Why do I do that? Well, because these are stories that I initially encountered outside of a religious setting. They're incredibly raw, powerful stories when I read them. They're wonder stories. They're horror stories. A crucifixion or child sacrifice is horrific. The parting of a sea so that people of slaves fleeing an oppressive culture can get across and they can see whales or fish as they, like on either side as they walk through a dry land. That's a wonder story. Why do I put zombies in them? Because it allows these stories to be raw and powerful and new again, as though you have never ever heard them before. That to me is a powerful thing. That's my goal when I write that series. My goal when I write that series is not outrage people. Sorry, I don't know if that's a very useful thing to share, but that's what I've got. Not outraging people, that's not the goal.
What they said.
Okay. So to go to a more light note, because we're going to go to audience questions soon, do you have any favorite examples of a well-done cross-cultural depiction? And to give you time to think, I'm just going to start off with one of my favorite ones, is the original Karate Kid. Because even though the story sort of technically follows a white kid in California, it's really much more about Mr. Miyagi and his struggle to accept how his family was put in internment camps while he was fighting for the U.S., and the way that he still managed to live within the U.S. and adopt this boy as his own. I thought it was a very respectful treatment of his culture and of how we can relate to each other. Is there any media like that you guys are particularly fond of?
Where are we starting?
Let's start with you.
Okay. The one I always recommend, one of my 5 favorite books in the world, is The Years of Rice and Salt by Kim Stanley Robinson. I see some nods! Yay, final fan! Awesome. Oh wait, you came to this panel and yeah, I recommended it and then you read it. Okay, cool. So great. So obviously this recommendation worked for somebody in the audience. Years of Rice and Salt is fantastic. It's by a white Californian male author who has deep affinities with Buddhism and has spent his entire life studying and talking with people from most of them from East and Central Asian world and some of the Middle East. So he writes an alternate history in which the Black Death wipes out Europe except Ireland. So there's very few white people left in the world, there's very few Christians left in the world. There are Native Americans, and much of the world gets colonized by China and by the Middle East. And he proceeds in a series of 10 novellas to tell the stories of the next 700 years. And he does it with this really just keen, humble questioning of what makes cultures tick. How did different cultures approach ethics and religion and science? And it's really, you can read it actually as the history of the development of science in a non-Western world. And so he's looking at how do all of these cultures pursue knowledge differently. In what ways does the history of the world end up being the same, and what ways does it end up being profoundly different? What does the splitting of the atom look like, told through the philosophy of a very different culture than Manhattan? What does when a Chinese man in that world's version of San Francisco, which is a primarily Chinese city in this world, when he's teaching a history class at school, how does he teach history? So that I found it a profoundly moving book and incredible alternate history sci-fi and deeply respectful of all of the wide variety of cultures it touches.
Just for nonfiction, it would be a book called Empire of the Sun and Moon, which was about the history of the clash of the Comanches and the West and the last fight that they had. It really changed the way I looked at the West and the nuances there and how tough people were back then. Both the natives and the white people that lived in mainly in Texas, and how I didn't know you heard the term manifest destiny. The Comanches pushed it back, for God's sakes, and I'm like, I didn't know that, And then you have 2 characters, Quanah Parker was the last of the Comanche chiefs, and then his adversary was Colonel Mackenzie, and they were both fighting each other. But then when the last one, the Comanche realized that they were at the end. Mackenzie, he kind of flipped, and he actually protected the Comanches because he could see how every time they signed a peace treaty, the natives get screwed, and he was actually there to protect Quanah Parker. And then Quanah Parker actually became a millionaire. And he had his estate in Oklahoma, where in the end, Colonel Mackenzie suffered from PTSD and he lost it all. So it was great. It's almost like a novel, this epic story. But locally, as far as a novel, I have a friend of mine named Manuel Ramos. He wrote this book called Desperado, and it's about the gentrification here in Denver. So I always think these class cultures, these cultural clashes happening somewhere else in the fictional world. Well, here it is right in Denver, and he writes about that. But he makes it very nuanced because you can have, on one hand, you have some, Chicanos that live in this neighborhood and they really resent the fact that, these big houses are being bought next door and all that. And then you have another guy who's a Chicano who's like, well, this is my house, if somebody's going to be offered me $1 million for it, why can't I take this? So he's got all those nuances that are going on, and it's not an easy fix to say it has to be exactly this way, or that everybody has the correct answer.
I'll make mine really quick. Three Musketeers, for me, written by Alexander Dumas, who was French, but he was also black.
Yeah.
The majority of the book and the whole reason he wrote it was because his father was a fantastic general who Napoleon hated and imprisoned purely because he was black. His father won lots and lots of wars and battles and things like that for France, and then Napoleon came along and was jealous and decided to jail his father. And his son, Alexander Dumas, of course, he thought that all of the heroics of his father should be recorded for everyone to read, and so that it would inspire more heroism in his people. And so, to me, that's a fantastic way of looking at multiculturalism and diversity, because his musketeers, it didn't matter what color they were. They represented the country of France, and so that was really important to him. And his stories have lived on. And in actuality, there has been no book in history that more movies have been made of than the Three Musketeers. So you can look that up. Wow. So.
I'll make mine really quick too. It's so Colleen Howes, The Tiger's Curse. She wrote about a cursed Indian prince, and she was actually the person who inspired me to write my own story, and she blurbed this book, so yay. She did a good job. Not with the blurb, with her book. Oh my gosh, the brain is like frying.
I'm being told we only have a few minutes left, and we only be able to take one or two questions. Are there any questions in the audience? Yes, right there.
Well, you all talk a lot about being respectful and doing the work and doing the research. Well, are there particular sources, methods besides talking to a friend you may have or something like that you find useful for that purpose? Make sure it's authentic.
The question was, since appropriation seems to be a lot about being lazy and not putting in the work to research what you need to research, what are good sources for doing the research that you need to do?
I mean, you could look online. Like I said, there's credible sources that you can find. I would not go to Wikipedia. I know you'd like it, yeah, but Wikipedia is not verified, and a lot of it, there's citations needed, and some of them are bogus. So, I mean, like educational sources, you can contact other writers that have written in those areas. And I know it's like if you have a friend, hey, my Puerto Rican friend, tell me about Puerto Rican food. I've had friends who've done that. And it's good if it's it depends on the type of the book, that you're writing. But yeah, I mean, that's where I would go first, is mostly online if it's really out of my sphere of personal interaction. But everything is available virtually anyway, so.
Yeah, I found a lot of Native American people that I didn't know, but other friends referred me to them through Facebook. And I just sent them messages, and a lot of them got back to me. A couple of Native American newspapers got back to me and stuff. So it's, the thing is, I think most of the time, most people will be thrilled that you're even bothering to do the research. And a lot of people are more than willing to help, so.
And besides those things, which I absolutely agree with all of those. I guess the other thing I could add is, does it depend on the type of book? or the type of art project you're doing, but if it's another culture that has a lot of recorded literature or recorded music or art that you can go see or access online or otherwise, just steep yourself in it. Read that other culture's stories as well as talking to its people and getting its recipes and all that. Just steep yourself in that other culture's art. Like if you're going to tell a story that's borrowing in some way or representing that culture, just steep yourself in the stories that culture is actually telling.
I like the Muppets. Especially, until I watched the Muppets, I didn't know the Swedish were funny, and then the Swedish chef. That's all respectful.
Kermit is a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
That is true.
I want to respect everyone's time. You said you had some real quick tips that you can go to?
Oh, tips, yeah. All right, so choose to do the background work properly. Reach out to sources. Don't make assumptions. Different cultures do things differently. How much research are you willing to do will show in your writing. Be humble about the fact that you may make mistakes. And remember that what drove you, what compelled you to write about these narratives in the first place, deserve the audience, and it will be good. Feedback will be good. Also, support marginalized voices, read own voices, and don't be afraid to write what you want to write.
All right, we're a minute over, so thank you everyone for coming.
I got stickers. Thank you all for being here.